Welcome back to another video, and in this video we are going to be continuing on with our SwiftUI tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can use popovers in SwiftUI. Now, popovers are rendered slightly differently based on the platform that you're using. They are available on I believe every platform. Now, macOS handles popovers slightly differently than, say, iOS and iPadOS do. But what popovers effectively are is they are a kind of modal that gets summoned typically when you press a button, when you click a button, tap a button, whatever, and they will display additional information generally. So, for example, a common use of a popover, granted this is on the web, but you can also do this on mobile, and in fact many popular apps do use popovers for this purpose. In registration forms, when you need to enter a username and a password for an account, typically a lot of the time you will find a info button that's like an eye with in a circle, right? And when you click that, a popover comes up with additional information. For example, the strength of the password, or the requirements for the password, and the requirements for the username and stuff like that. So popovers are very useful for things like that, and we're going to learn how we can use that. So the most basic popover is where we have a binding to a Boolean, determining whether or not to present that popover, and we have a content closure. So inside of that content closure, we would put the view, like the view hierarchy that we want our popover to contain. There are other popover modifiers that you could use. I urge you to explore them a little bit, but we're going to take a look at two of them, or at least two options that you can work with here. So inside of Xcode, you can see I have a blank content view right now, and what we're going to do is we're going to have a simple button that just says click me. All right, and inside of the button's action closure, we are going to say is presented dot toggle. Now, we haven't created any state variable called is presented yet, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we'll say at state private var is presented bool equals false. Now we have it by default we have it set to false because we don't want the popover to be presented when the view is presented to the user, like when the view appears and loads and does all that stuff. We don't want our popover to be displayed. We only want the popover to be displayed when the button is tapped or clicked, right? So if we run our code right now, let me check my run destination here. Okay, yep. The run destination is my Mac at the moment. So let it load here. All right, so this is what we have. It's pretty simple. We just have a button that says click me. We click it and it does nothing. Precisely how we precisely what we expected. However, the only thing that it does is it toggles the state boolean that we have, but that state change doesn't trigger anything. And we want that to trigger a popover. So back on the button here, we are going to attach a modifier dot popover. And we want is presented $ is presented. And then content. Now, because this is a closure, we can have a trailing closure. And we will put text, this is a popover. Now, another thing we could do is we could put any view that we want inside of our popover. So let's say we have a Z stack where we have a nice big circle, and this text will appear to be inside of that circle. All right, so we have a Z stack. All right, close that up. We'll give a circle. This circle is going to have a it's going to have stroke of dot, let's say blue, and a line width of 5. Then we'll set its frame with a width of, let's say, 500. And a height of 500. All right, there we go. Now we can save this, run our code. We have a successful build. Now let's click this button here. And you can see now a little modal window pops up. And inside of this modal here, this popover, we have a blue outlined circle with a thick border and the text, this is a popover, inside of it. Or at least what appears to be inside of it. And then if we want to dismiss it, we can just hit escape and it will dismiss. Pretty neat. Now, what if we wanted to customize this just a little bit more? Well, what we can do is where we have our popover modifier here, there are a few other parameters that we could provide. So we want, what I'm going to do so we are going to open up our parentheses here. And we want, okay, so what we can do is we can say attachment anchor. So let's pass in our is presented. And then for the attachment anchor, this is a popover attachment anchor. And we have a few options. We can attach it to a specific point. we can attach it to a specific rectangle. So we're going to attach it to a specific rectangle. And then we are given we need to provide it with a source. So what rectangle do you want to attach this to? Right. And we have a few options. We can say, hey, we want to attach this to the bounds of the view. Right. So we want this to be anchored to that bounding rectangle of our button. If you have a reference to a specific rectangle, you can also provide that. I'm going to say bounds because I want the popover to be anchored rather, to the bounding rectangle of the button. And then there is another parameter that we can give it, and that is, I believe it's arrow edge. Now this will specify where the popover appears from. Like, do you want it to appear on the trailing edge, the leading edge, the top, or the bottom edge of where you have it anchored? This primarily works on macOS. On iOS, this, I believe, even as of iOS 18, this is ignored on iOS and iPadOS. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I'm fairly certain this is ignored on macOS. So we have a couple options for the arrow edge. We can say bottom, leading, top, trailing, right? So I'm going to say, let's say the bottom edge. Now, one thing to keep in mind about the specific arrow edge that you specify is that it's not going to always conform to that choice. And the reason for that is because if there's not enough room on screen to display that popover on the edge that you want to present it on, it will present it on a different edge as necessary to accommodate for the space. But let's go ahead and run our code. And here we go. So here's our application again. Let's click the button. And now we see our popover. It appears below the button as we intended it. Now let's change the color of the popover's content here, just so we can get an idea of what we're looking at. So I'm going to say stroke.blue. We're going to keep that the same. But we will fill it. And the color that we'll fill it with will be a, let's say it'll be, we'll say it'll be yellow. So dot yellow. Let's keep the frame the same. Well, actually, you know what? Let's decrease that frame just slightly. So instead of 500, we'll say 300. Just so when we run it on the iPhone, it will fit on screen. And then for the text, we will set we'll set the text color to be black, so we have contrast enough to be able to see the text over the circle. So we'll say dot foreground style dot black. Just like that. Save, run. All right, so here we are. Let's go ahead and click the button again. And there's our popover with our button. Or there's our popover with our little circle there. You can see the text is black, the circle is yellow, and the outline of the circle is blue. Now, popovers can technically be, on macOS anyway, as big as you want them. But you do have to be reasonable with the size of your popover content, because you don't want to include too much information in the popovers. I urge you to read the human interface guidelines section for popovers so you kind of get an idea of what is expected when designing apps for Apple platforms and using popovers. So that way you can kind of have a general idea of how to make your user experience a little bit more fine-tuned. But that is that's how we can make a popover on macOS. Let's run this on iOS and on the iPad, and we'll see what that looks like. So I'm going to go to the toolbar, go to my run destinations. Let's start by running this on the iPhone 16 Pro Max, the most recent, largest iPhone currently available. The simulator's got to run, do its thing. It's got to load up. So here's the simulator. Our app is currently loading. All right. Yeah, it's still trying to load and do its thing. Just got to give it a second. I did not have the simulator open already, and I probably should have, but that's fine. So let's go ahead and tap the button. And there's our popover. You can see our circle as well as the outline and the text color. Now, of course, like I mentioned, on iOS, the popover isn't exactly the same as it would be on the Mac. And the two additional parameters, the anchor and the arrow edge, are ignored. All right, so now let's run this on the iPad. So let's see. I want the 13-inch iPad Pro. Okay, here we go. Let's run it. Okay, here we go. Now the iPad has to load here because it's a brand new simulator that I have not used as of yet. So you can see, of course, it's trying to boot here. All right. Okay, so I'm going to also change the appearance to dark mode. There we go. Let's click the button. And there is our popover. Again, it's not quite the same as it is on macOS, but it is there. So that pretty much does it for this video on popovers in SwiftUI. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.